When I arrived late to my daughter's Christmas dinner, I stood outside and heard my son-in-law say, "Honestly, things would be better if he didn't come." I looked through the window and froze when I saw my daughter kneeling on the floor cleaning while her husband's family raised their glasses and enjoyed dinner together. I didn't walk inside. I quietly returned to my car and made a decision that no one saw coming. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge Stories. I'm truly thankful for your support. Which country or city are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Also note that some fictional elements were added for entertainment and reflection. Any similarity to names or locations is coincidental, but the core lesson is powerful. The engine died at the worst possible moment, 7:43 on Christmas Eve on a two-lane stretch of Millbrook Road, with nothing but frozen cornfields on both sides, and a sky so black it felt like the world had forgotten to leave the lights on. I sat behind the wheel for exactly 3 seconds before I got out of the car. That was something Margot used to tease me about. She said I never panicked. I just counted to 3, then moved. Raymond Calloway. She told me once, her hand warm on my arm, "You are the only man alive who treats a crisis like a to-do list." I had laughed then. I did not laugh now. I just popped the hood, grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, and got to work. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside, the kind of December cold that does not ease in gradually, but arrives all at once like a door slamming shut. My breath came out in thick white clouds as I leaned over the engine. A loose battery cable. Simple enough. I had fixed worse in the driveway of the house on Clover Street, the house where I had raised 2 children and buried a wife and somehow kept the gutters clean every single fall. I was 68 years old, standing alone on the side of a highway on Christmas Eve, fixing my own car. There was no one to call. That was not self-pity talking. It was just the arithmetic of my life at that particular moment. Nathan lived an hour north and was spending the holiday with his wife's family in Vermont. And Caroline, well, Caroline was who I was driving toward. I tightened the cable, closed the hood, and wiped my hands on the shop rag I kept tucked behind the driver's seat. Margot had put it there 15 years ago, and I had replaced it 7 times, since always in the same spot, always the same faded blue. Back inside the car, I checked the clock. 8:19. I was already 40 minutes behind. On the back seat sat a white bakery box, tied with red and white string. A dozen ginger cookies I had baked myself the night before. Lily's favorite. She had told me so the previous Christmas, very seriously, the way 10-year-old girls announce important truths. "Grandpa, your ginger cookies are better than store-bought. Don't ever stop making them." I had not forgotten. I never forgot anything Lily said to me. I pulled back onto the road and drove. The heater hummed. The radio played something instrumental, a jazz version of "Oh Holy Night" that Margot would have recognized in the first 3 notes. She had a gift for that. Music, people, the spaces between words. She read a room the way other people read books, effortlessly and completely. I had always relied on her for that. 5 years without her, and I still turned to say something to the empty passenger seat at least once a week. Old habits do not die. They just learn to be quiet. I thought about the past year as I drove. The refinancing paperwork I had co-signed for Caroline and Derek in January. 30 pages, 2 notaries, and a loan officer who kept looking at my retirement account balance like it was something that belonged to him. The roof repair I had covered in April, $12,000 after Derek insisted the contractor they wanted was the only one worth hiring. And somehow the bill landed in my lap. Lily's tuition at Maplewood Academy, the private school with the good science program, and the tuition payments that came due every August like clockwork. I did not resent any of it. That was the truth, or at least it had been the truth for a long time. Caroline was my daughter. Lily was my granddaughter. A man provides for his family. That was what my father had taught me and his father before him, and I had never found a reason to argue with it. In the narrow top drawer of my desk at home underneath a folded road map I had not used in 20 years sat a small black notebook with a worn cover. I had started it 3 years ago, not out of suspicion, not out of resentment, but simply because I am a man who keeps records. Every payment logged in my own handwriting. Every date, every amount, every purpose. Column by column, page by page. I had not looked at it in months. I was not sure why I was thinking about it now. The exit for Deerfield Heights came up on my right, and I took it. The neighborhood where Caroline and Derek lived was 12 minutes off the highway, wide suburban streets, well-maintained lawns, buried now under a thin layer of snow houses lit up with Christmas lights that cost more than most people's electric bills. I had helped them buy into this neighborhood. That was a fact I carried quietly, the way you carry something heavy that you have chosen to carry, and so cannot complain about. I turned onto Birchwood Lane and saw their house from the end of the block. Every window was lit. The driveway held 3 cars I did not recognize alongside Derek's leased Audi. Through the front window I could make out movement shapes, laughter, the warm blur of a party already well underway. I parked at the curb, cut the engine, and sat for a moment. I reached back and picked up the box of ginger cookies. The string had come slightly loose during the drive, and I retied it carefully in the dark, the way Margot had taught me: loop twice, pull, even tuck the ends. I was about to open the car door when I noticed that the narrow window along the side of the house, the one that ran above the kitchen sink, was cracked open an inch. Even from the curb, I could hear voices carrying out into the cold night air. I stepped out of the car. I walked up the front path toward the door the way I always did. But the voices grew clearer as I neared the side of the house, and something in the tone of them, something flat and certain and not meant for any guest to hear, made my feet slow without my telling them to. I stopped at the edge of the path, 3 feet from that open window, the box of ginger cookies in both hands. And I listened. The voices came through that open inch of window, the way cold air comes through a crack in the wall, thin at first, then impossible to ignore. I recognized Derek's voice immediately. He had a particular way of speaking at parties, a volume slightly too loud for the room, the tone of a man who wanted to make sure everyone within 20 feet understood he was the one worth listening to. I had never said that out loud to anyone, not even to Margot, though I suspect she had cataloged it long before I did. "Honestly," Derek said, and then he laughed the way men laugh when they believe they are among friends loose and unguarded. "It would be better for everyone if he just stopped coming altogether." I did not move. I told myself I had misheard. The wind, the distance, the glass between us, any of those things could twist a sentence into something it was not. I am a man who prefers evidence over assumption. Margot used to say I would need 3 witnesses and a signed affidavit before I believed anything that upset me. She was not wrong. Then Caroline spoke. Her voice was quieter than Derek's, but the window was cracked, and the night was still, and every word reached me with a terrible clarity. "We just need to get through the next few months," she said. "Once we get that money sorted out, we won't have to depend on him for anything." The box of ginger cookies shifted in my hands. I looked down at it, without meaning, to the red and white string I had retied so carefully in the dark 20 minutes ago, the white cardboard gone slightly soft at one corner from the cold. Lily's favorite. I had spent 40 minutes in my kitchen the night before, measuring flour and rolling dough and cutting each cookie into the same imperfect star shape, the way I had done every Christmas since she was old enough to eat solid food. I set the box down on the ground beside my left foot, carefully, so it would not tip. Then I looked up, and I looked through the window. The kitchen was bright and warm, the way kitchens look, in the kind of Christmas movies that play on cable television every December, the ones that make you believe family is a thing that happens naturally, without effort, without cost. A pot of something simmered on the back burner. The counters held trays of food, half-empty bottles of wine, a stack of cloth napkins that I recognized as the ones I had bought Caroline 3 Christmases ago at a linen shop in town. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see into the living room. Thomas Harmon, Derek's father, a broad-shouldered man in his early 70s, who had retired from commercial real estate and never stopped acting like every room he entered was a property. He was evaluating, sat in the armchair closest to the fireplace. The best chair in the room? Derek's mother sat beside him on the sofa, and 2 people I did not recognize, likely the Harmon cousins Derek had mentioned in passing, filled out the rest of the seating. They were drinking. They were laughing. The fireplace was going, and the room was the picture of warmth. Caroline was not in the living room. My eyes moved back to the kitchen, and I found her. She was on her hands and knees on the kitchen tile, a dish towel in her right hand, scrubbing at a dark stain near the base of the island red wine by the color of it already beginning to set into the grout. Her hair had come loose from whatever she had put it up in earlier. Her dress, the dark green one she bought for the season, had a damp patch on the knee where she had been kneeling on the wet floor. She was working fast, efficiently, with the focused silence of someone who had learned that the best way to avoid a comment about the mess was to make the mess disappear before anyone noticed. No one in the living room was looking at her. No one called out to ask if she needed help. Thomas Harmon refilled his own glass and said something that made Derek's mother laugh. I stood outside in the cold, with my hand flat against the siding of my own daughter's house, and I felt something move through my chest that I do not have a clean word for. It was not anger, not yet. It was closer to the feeling you get when you are reading a book, and you suddenly understand 3 chapters before the ending exactly how it is going to go, and the understanding sits in you like a stone. Caroline, my daughter, who had my mother's hands and Margot's laugh, and who had called me crying the night before her wedding, because she was not sure she was making the right choice. And I had told her that Derek was a good man, that she should trust herself, that everything was going to be fine. I had believed that when I said it. I wanted to remember that clearly. I had believed it completely. She wrung out the dish towel over the sink, her back to the window, her shoulders tight with the particular tension of someone holding themselves together in front of an audience that was not even paying attention. Then she straightened up, smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, and walked back into the living room wearing a smile I recognized. I had seen that smile at my wife's funeral. It was the smile you put on when you cannot afford to fall apart. I picked up the box of ginger cookies from the ground. The cardboard had taken on a little more cold from the concrete. I held it against my chest for a moment, both arms wrapped around it, the way you hold something when you are deciding what to do with it. Then I turned around. I walked back down the side path to the front of the house, past the mailbox, with the Harmon name stenciled beneath Carolyn's past, the decorative sled Derek had placed near the front steps for effect. I walked to my car at the curb. I unlocked the door. I got in. I sat in the driver's seat with the cookie box on my lap and the engine off, and the windows beginning to fog from the inside. And I looked straight ahead at the lit house of my daughter, and I breathed. I was not going inside tonight. Something had ended on that sidewalk. I could not name it precisely, not yet. But I knew with the same quiet certainty I had felt the morning the doctors told me about Margot, that some things once seen cannot be unseen, and some decisions once made do not need to be made again. I started the engine. I did not look at the house as I pulled away from the curb. I drove home the long way, not because I was lost. I had lived in this town for 31 years and could navigate every back road with my eyes closed, but because I was not ready to stop moving. Motion had always been the thing that kept my thoughts in order. Margot used to complain about it gently, the way she complained about most things, with a half smile that took the edge off. "Raymond, you process the world through your feet," she told me once. "If you could walk while you slept, you would." She had not been wrong about that either. By the time I turned onto Clover Street, the clock on the dashboard read 9:51. The neighborhood was quiet in the way only Christmas Eve gets quiet. Every house lit, no one outside, the whole street sealed up against the cold like a row of envelopes. I pulled into my driveway, cut the headlights, and sat there for a moment, with my hands still on the wheel. The house looked smaller than I remembered. That happened sometimes when I had been away, even for just a few hours. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a kitchen Margot had redesigned twice and still called almost right. We had raised Nathan and Caroline inside those walls. We had argued and laughed and eaten 10,000 meals and watched the news and fallen asleep on the sofa with the television still running. It was the most ordinary house on an ordinary street, and for 30 years it had been the whole world. I got out of the car. I left the cookie box on the passenger seat. Inside, I did not turn on many lights. Just the lamp in the corner of the living room and the small fixture above the stove. Enough to see by without making the emptiness too obvious. I filled a glass of water at the kitchen sink and drank half of it standing up, looking out the window above the sink at the neighbor's yard, dark and still under its thin coat of snow. Then I walked into the living room and sat down in the armchair closest to the fireplace. Not my chair that had always been the one by the window. This was Margot's chair. I sat in it sometimes when I needed to think clearly, which I recognized was probably not a healthy habit, and did not intend to stop. Her photograph was on the mantel, the one from Nathan's college graduation. Her head tilted slightly to the left, the way it always did when she was genuinely happy rather than performing happiness for a camera. I looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Then I said out loud into the quiet room, "I should have listened to you about Derek 5 years ago." She did not answer. She never did. But the act of saying it to her face, even a photographed face, made it more real in a way I could not entirely explain. I reached over to the side table and picked up my phone. Caroline had called 4 times between 9:15 and 9:40. There was one text sent at 9:47, "Dad, where are you? Everyone was asking about you." I read it twice. I set the phone face down on the armrest. I thought about what I had seen through that kitchen window. Caroline on her hands and knees on the tile floor. Her green dress damp at the knee, scrubbing at a stain, while Thomas Harmon refilled his wine glass 12 feet away and did not look up. The smell of whatever was simmering on the back burner drifting out through that cracked window, along with Derek's voice and my daughter's quiet compliance. The smile she put on when she walked back into the living room. The smile I had seen before at the worst moment of our family's life. She had been performing for that household the same way she had performed at Margot's funeral, holding herself together for an audience that expected her to be fine. And I had been paying for the stage. I got up and walked to my desk in the small room off the hallway that I had always called the study, though it was really just a room where I kept books and paperwork and the things I did not know where else to put. I opened the top drawer. Underneath the folded road map and a rubber band that had lost most of its elasticity, my fingers found the black notebook. I carried it back to Margot's chair and opened it in my lap. 3 years of entries, my own handwriting neat and consistent, the way my 8th grade teacher had drilled into me, and which had never left. Dates down the left margin, amounts in the next column, purpose in the third. The entries went back to January of 2022, the first time I had co-signed a loan document for Caroline and Derek, standing at a bank counter with a pen in my hand and a feeling in my stomach I had chosen to ignore. I did not add up the columns tonight. I already knew the total. I had added it up 2 months ago on a Sunday afternoon, and then closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer and told myself it did not matter, that family did not keep score, that Margot would have done the same thing without hesitating. But Margot was not here, and the money was gone. And my daughter was on her knees on a kitchen floor while her husband laughed in the next room. I closed the notebook and held it in both hands for a moment, feeling the worn edges of the cover, the slight ridge where the binding had started to separate at the top corner. Then I put it on the side table next to the lamp where I would see it in the morning. I picked up my phone. I opened the contacts and found Helen Carter, a woman I had met at a neighborhood association meeting 3 years ago, sharp and direct and thoroughly unbothered by sentiment, which was exactly what I needed right now. She was the best real estate agent in the county. Everyone said so. I had filed that information away without knowing why. Now I knew why. I did not call her. It was almost 10:30 on Christmas Eve, and I was not the kind of man who called people at 10:30 on Christmas Eve, even with news this significant. Instead, I pressed the button for voicemail and waited for the tone. "Not Helen too," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is Raymond Calloway. We met at the Birchwood Avenue Association meeting a few years back. I have a 4-bedroom house on Clover Street that I need to sell. Good condition, maintained well, good bones. I'd like to move fast." I paused for exactly 1 second. "Call me first thing tomorrow morning." I ended the call. I set the phone on the side table next to the black notebook. The lamp in the corner threw a warm circle of light across the ceiling. Outside, the street was still completely silent. I leaned back in Margot's chair, looked up at the ceiling, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt the particular calm that comes not from peace, but from clarity, from knowing exactly what comes next, and no longer being afraid of it. I closed my eyes. I slept. I woke up in Margot's chair with a stiff neck and both hands still folded in my lap, the black notebook on the side table exactly where I had left it, the lamp still burning in the corner because I had forgotten to turn it off. The clock on the mantel read 6:48. I sat with the stiffness for a minute, the way you do when you are 68 and have slept in a chair, letting the joints remember what they were supposed to do. Then I stood up, turned off the lamp, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Christmas morning. I had spent 31 of them in this house. The first one with Nathan, just 6 weeks old, Margot in her bathrobe on the kitchen floor, assembling a bassinet at 2 in the morning, because neither of us had thought to do it beforehand. The last one with Margot herself 4 months before the diagnosis. The two of us opening gifts alone because the kids had their own families by then, drinking coffee at this same table and reading the newspaper, and not needing to say much of anything. That had been enough. That had been more than enough. I drank my coffee standing at the counter. I did not sit down. Sitting felt like waiting, and I was done waiting. By 7:30, I had showered, shaved, and put on a collared shirt and the charcoal wool trousers I usually saved for church. Margot used to raise an eyebrow when I dressed carefully for difficult tasks, going to the bank meeting with contractors, any situation where I needed to feel like myself rather than like a man being pushed around. You put on good clothes when you're about to do something hard. She had observed once early in our marriage, not as a criticism, but as a fact she had simply noticed and filed away. She was right. It was armor of a kind. Quiet, unremarkable, and entirely effective. I was in the car by 7:55. First National Bank on Commerce Street opened at 8 on weekdays, including the day after Christmas. I had checked their hours on my phone while the coffee was brewing. The parking lot held only 4 other cars when I pulled in, a skeleton crew running the branch on a slow post-holiday morning. Inside, the lobby smelled of carpet cleaner and artificial pine from a small decorated tree near the entrance. A young woman at the nearest window looked up and wished me a Merry Christmas, with the particular cheerfulness of someone earning holiday pay. Merry Christmas, I said. I need to close a joint account and transfer the full balance to my individual account. And I need to report an authorized user card for cancellation. She did not blink. In 30 years of banking, I had learned that tellers are trained to process requests, not to question the human situations behind them. She asked for my account number and my identification. I provided both. She typed. She confirmed the balance, the full amount sitting in the joint account that I alone had funded month after month for the past 4 years. The account I had opened originally as a convenience, and which had become, without my fully noticing, a pipeline. In the United States, a joint bank account works on what is called the right of survivorship and equal access, meaning either account holder can withdraw any amount at any time without the consent of the other. It also means either holder can close the account entirely provided they are present and verified. Caroline's name was on the account. But so was mine. And I was the one standing at the window. I'd like the full balance transferred to my personal checking account, I said. Effective immediately. Of course, Mr. Calloway. More typing. And the authorized user card, an authorized user on a credit card account, has no ownership of the account itself. They are granted access at the discretion of the primary cardholder. And that access can be revoked at any time, for any reason, with no notice required. I gave the representative the last 4 digits of the card Caroline carried in her wallet, the card I had added her to 11 months ago so she could handle household groceries and school expenses for Lily. The card that, according to my last 3 statements, had been used at a day spa in Westfield, a wine subscription service I had never heard of, and a clothing boutique on the north side of town that I was fairly certain did not sell groceries. Cancel it, I said. Immediately, please. Done. She printed 2 confirmation slips and slid them across the counter. I folded them once and put them in the breast pocket of my jacket. I was back in the parking lot by 8:34. The cold had sharpened since I had gone in. I stood beside my car for a moment, breathing it in, the confirmation slips a slight weight in my pocket. From somewhere nearby, a church bell was ringing, probably St. Andrew's on the next block, the 8:45 service starting to gather. Margot and I had gone to that service every Christmas morning for 22 years. Last year, I had gone alone and sat in our usual pew and shaken the pastor's hand afterward and driven home and eaten leftover soup for lunch. Ray. I turned. Gloria Hutchins was crossing the parking lot toward me, a canvas tote bag over one arm and a look of mild surprise on her face. She lived 4 houses down from me on Clover Street and had been my neighbor for 19 years, a retired school librarian with silver hair cut close and the direct conversational manner of a woman who had spent decades keeping 12-year-olds honest about whether they had actually read the assigned book. Gloria, I said. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. She looked at the bank behind me, then back at me. Her expression shifting into the careful neutrality of a woman deciding how much to ask. Everything all right? Fine, I said. Then, because Gloria had known Margot and had shoveled my front walk twice last winter without being asked, I added, just taking care of some things. She studied me for a moment with the patient attention she had probably once used on students who were not telling the whole truth. Then she nodded slowly. Good, she said. It's about time someone did. She patted my arm once firmly and walked toward the bank entrance. I got in my car. On the passenger seat, my phone screen had lit up 3 missed calls from Caroline, the earliest time stamped at 8:12. Below them, a single text, Dad, I need to talk to you. Please call me back. I looked at the screen for exactly 3 seconds. Then I put the car in reverse and pulled out of the lot, pointing the car toward the office of Helen Carter, who had called me back at 7:52 this morning and left a message that said, in a voice as crisp and no-nonsense as a signed contract, "Mr. Calloway, I got your message. I have time this morning. Come by at 10. Helen Carter arrived at 9:58, which told me everything I needed to know about her. A woman who shows up 2 minutes early to a listing appointment on the day after Christmas is a woman who takes her work seriously, regardless of what the calendar says. She drove a dark blue sedan, practical and clean, and she carried a leather portfolio under one arm and a measuring tape clipped to her jacket pocket. She was somewhere in her mid-50s with the kind of direct eye contact that made you feel pleasantly that she had already decided to be honest with you. "Mr. Calloway," she said, extending her hand at the front door. Her grip was firm and brief. "Let's see what we've got." We walked through every room. I did not follow her around, explaining things the way some sellers do, pointing out which outlets worked and which light fixtures were original, and why the third step on the staircase creaked. Helen did not need a guided tour. She moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone reading a document she had seen many times before, making small notations in her portfolio, occasionally pressing her thumb against a wall or testing a window latch without comment. In the kitchen, she paused at the bay window that looked out over the backyard. The yard was covered in snow, the garden beds Margot had kept going for 20 years buried and resting underneath it. "Your wife's?" she asked, nodding toward the stone border visible above the snow line. "Yes," I said. Helen made a note. "Buyers love a mature garden," she said. "It photographs well in spring, but we're not waiting for spring." We were not. She gave me the listing price in the living room, standing with her portfolio open and her reading glasses pushed up on her head. The number made me straighten slightly, not from surprise exactly, but from the particular sensation of hearing your own life quantified accurately for the first time. The market was active. The house was maintained. The location was good. She expected multiple offers within the first week. I signed the listing agreement at my kitchen table at 11:15. Helen left with a copy and a promise to have the photographer there the following morning, and the sign in the ground by noon. She was as good as her word. The for sale sign went into the front lawn at 11:47 on the 28th. I know the exact time because I was standing at the living room window watching Helen's assistant drive the stake into the frozen ground with 2 clean strikes of a rubber mallet. The sign was white with blue lettering, Helen's name and number across the bottom, and a small red banner across the top corner that said "Motivated Seller," which had been my suggestion, and which Helen had accepted without argument. I had just turned away from the window to continue wrapping the books from the shelf nearest the fireplace when I heard the car. I did not need to look to know whose it was. Caroline drove a silver SUV with a loose heat shield under the rear panel that rattled at low speeds, a repair I had offered to pay for twice, and which Derek had declined both times for reasons he never fully articulated. The rattle announced her from half a block away. She did not knock. She had a key, after all. The spare I had given her 3 years ago when she had asked for it, framing the request as concern for my safety. What if something happened? What if I fell? What if she needed to get in quickly? I had handed it over without hesitation because it had seemed at the time like a reasonable thing a daughter would ask for. The front door opened, and Caroline came in fast. The cold air rushing in behind her, her coat half-buttoned, and her hair pulled back unevenly the way it got when she had left the house in a hurry. Behind her, hanging back on the front porch, with her small hands stuffed into the pockets of a red wool coat, was Lily. I had not expected Lily. "What is that sign doing in your yard?" Caroline demanded. Her voice had a particular pitch to it, not quite a shout, but built in that direction, a foundation being poured. "What is going on? You didn't answer my calls, you didn't respond to my texts, And now there is a for sale sign on your lawn on the day after Christmas. The 28th, I said. It's the 28th. Dad. Her jaw tightened. This is our family home. It is my home, I said. My name is on the deed. It has always been my name on the deed. I kept my voice level the way you keep a carpenter's level, not by forcing it, but by letting it settle. I need my house key back, Caroline. She stared at me. What? The spare key. I need it back. The color moved up her neck, the way it always had when she was caught between anger and something she could not argue with directly. Her hand went to her coat pocket reflexively, like she was checking that the key was still there. I need that key in case of an emergency. What if you fall? What if something happens? If something happens to me, I said, I will call 911. The paramedics have their own way in. I held out my hand, palm up. The key, please. She unclipped it from her key ring with short, sharp movements and pressed it into my palm hard enough that I felt the edge of it. I closed my fingers around it and put it in my trouser pocket. The silence between us had weight and temperature. Then Lily stepped through the front door, moving carefully around her mother, the way children learn to move around adult arguments, and looked up at me with Margot's eyes, the same shape, the same particular shade of brown that leaned toward amber in good light. Grandpa, she said, with the solemn directness that was entirely her own. Did you eat last night? Mom said she saved you a plate, but then she said you didn't come. She paused. It was the good lasagna, but then we had it for breakfast, and it was still pretty good. Something moved through my chest. I crouched down to her level, my knees protesting the way they always did, and I looked at her face. I wasn't very hungry last night, sweetheart, I said. Lily considered this seriously. Then, was it because of the real dinner? Because Gloria next door told Mom that when someone makes 2 dinners, it usually means one of them is for show. Caroline's breath caught audibly. I looked at my granddaughter, this 10-year-old girl in the red wool coat, who had just, without knowing it or trying to confirm something I had suspected since the moment I had stood outside that kitchen window 3 nights ago with a box of ginger cookies going cold in my hands. I stood back up slowly. Outside, a car turned onto Clover Street and slowed the sound of someone reading a for sale sign from the road. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I already knew the name on the screen before I looked. Derek Harmon. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Not because I was not nervous, but because I had learned a long time ago that the first thing you do in a difficult conversation sets the temperature for everything that follows. A man who answers on the first ring is a man who has been waiting. I had not been waiting. I had been standing in my living room watching my granddaughter button her red coat at the front door, while her mother stared at the middle distance with the expression of someone doing arithmetic they did not like the answer to. Derek, I said. Oh, what did you do? His voice came through the phone at a volume that suggested he was not particularly concerned about who else might hear him. In the background, I could make out the particular acoustics of an upscale restaurant, the low murmur of other conversations, the clean ring of silverware on good china music that had been chosen to be unobtrusive and had succeeded. I am standing at the register at the Wellington right now, and my card was just declined. In front of 3 people from Henderson Consulting. Do you understand how that looks? I walked to the window and looked out at the front yard. The for sale sign was still there, white and blue against the gray December sky, the motivated seller banner catching a little wind at the corner. That card was mine, Derek, I said. I closed it 2 days ago. You closed it. He repeated the words with the tone of a man who had expected to be told there was a mistake, a bank error, a system glitch, something correctable. You just closed it. Without any notice. Authorized users on a credit card account can be removed at any time by the primary cardholder, I said. No notice is required. That is how the arrangement works. It was always how it worked. I kept my voice the same way I kept my hands during that sort of conversation. Open, relaxed, nothing clenched. The card was in my name, Derek. The account was mine. I closed it. We had an agreement. His voice dropped, which meant he was aware of the people around him, which meant he was more embarrassed than angry, which meant the anger was going to get worse in a few minutes when the embarrassment finished burning. You help with our day-to-day so that we can put our income toward the new house. That was the understanding. That understanding ended on Christmas Eve, I said. A pause. Long enough that I could hear him breathing through it. What is that supposed to mean? I did not answer that question. There are questions that deserve answers, and questions that are asked, because the person asking them already knows, and is hoping you will be the one to say it out loud so they do not have to. Derek knew exactly what Christmas Eve meant. He had been there for it. He had in fact been the one talking. You are a grown man with a salary, I said instead. Pay for your own lunch, Derek. That is what grown men do. This is unbelievable. The embarrassment had finished burning. The anger had arrived right on schedule. Do you have any idea what you are doing to this family? To Caroline. She has been calling you for 3 days, and you won't even pick up the phone. You put a for sale sign on the house she grew up in without a single conversation, and now you're canceling cards and closing accounts like some kind of what? I asked. He did not finish the sentence. I picked up the small copper watering can from the shelf beside the window. Margot's the one she had kept filled for the ferns she grew along the sill, and began watering the ferns she had grown, and I had maintained for 5 years because they were hers, and keeping them alive was the closest thing to a conversation I could still have with her. The Wellington is a nice restaurant, I said, tilting the can over the first fern. The halibut is supposed to be excellent. I hope your colleagues enjoy it. I moved to the second fern. Figure out the bill, Derek. You're a resourceful man. You are making a massive mistake. His voice had gone low and deliberate, the register men use when they want to sound like a warning rather than a complaint. There are going to be consequences to this, old man. I'm telling you right now. I stopped watering. My name, I said very clearly, is Raymond. It has always been Raymond. You have known me for 7 years. Silence. Figure out the bill, I said again. And I ended the call. I set the phone face up on the windowsill and finished watering the ferns. The second one, the one Margot had called her favorite, because it had come back 3 times from what she described as certain death, had put out 2 new fronds since November. I had noticed them last week and had not had anyone to mention it to. Caroline called 4 minutes later. I watched her name light up the screen and pulse twice, 3 times 4. I reached over and turned the phone face down on the sill. Outside, a car slowed on Clover Street, the driver reading the for sale sign, and then moved on. The house was very quiet. I was thinking about Nathan, my son who taught high school biology in a town an hour north, and who had called me on my birthday in September and talked for 40 minutes about a unit he was building on ecosystems, and which of his students were actually getting it, and which ones were faking it convincingly. Nathan, who had never once asked me for money, and who I was fairly certain did not know the full shape of what had been happening in this family for the past 3 years. I had not told him because I had not wanted him to worry, and because some part of me had believed for longer than I should have that things would correct themselves without intervention. Things do not correct themselves. That was a lesson I had learned at 63 when a doctor used the word malignant in a sentence about Margot, and I understood standing in that hallway that waiting for things to get better on their own was a luxury I could no longer afford. I picked the phone back up and considered calling Nathan now. I decided against it. Not because I did not want to talk to him, but because I had nothing resolved yet to tell him. And Nathan was a man who needed the full picture before he could be useful to anyone, including himself. He had gotten that from Margot. I set the phone back down. The doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. Helen had no reason to come back today. Gloria usually knocked rather than ringing the bell. I crossed the living room to the front door, looked through the peephole, and felt something shift in my chest, not painfully, but the way a window shifts when you unlatch it after a long winter, and the air changes all at once. Nathan was standing on my front porch with a brown paper bag in both hands and snow on his shoulders and the expression of a man who had driven an hour without calling ahead because he was not sure if he called that he would be told to come. I opened the door. He had his mother's way of standing in a doorway, weight on the left foot. Shoulders relaxed, the posture of someone who had decided before arriving that whatever they found on the other side was something they could handle. Nathan was 41 years old and had his mother's patience and his mother's way of listening. And right now, his mother's eyes looking at me with the particular steadiness that had always made me feel in the best possible way that I was being seen clearly and not judged for what was found. "Dad can't," he said. "Nathan," I said. We stood like that for exactly 1 second. Then he held up the brown paper bag. "I stopped at Carlucci's on the way down. They had the chicken soup, you like the one with the wide noodles, and the sourdough." Carlucci's was 40 minutes out of his way. I stepped back from the door to let him in. He came inside and looked around the living room. The half-filled boxes along the wall, the gaps on the shelves where the books had been, the bare rectangle on the mantel where the framed botanical print had hung for 22 years. He did not say anything about any of it. He just carried the bag to the kitchen and started taking out the containers the way he had always moved through tasks methodically, without fuss, as though the work itself was the point, and commentary would only slow things down. I got 2 bowls from the cabinet. We had eaten at this table 10,000 times, and the choreography of it required no discussion. He poured the soup. I cut the sourdough. He found the spoons in the drawer where they had always been. I filled 2 glasses of water. We sat down. For a few minutes, we just ate. The soup was exactly right, rich and thick. The wide egg noodles soft without being mushy, the kind of thing that tastes like someone made it for a specific person, rather than for the general concept of hunger. I had not eaten a real meal in 3 days, I realized. Coffee and half a piece of toast, and whatever I had found in the back of the refrigerator on the 26th. My body registered the soup with something close to relief. "Caroline called you," I said. It was not a question. "Yesterday afternoon," Nathan said. "She wanted me to come down and talk some sense into you." He broke off a piece of sourdough. "I told her I'd think about it." "And did you think about it?" "For about 4 minutes." He looked up from his bowl. "Then I got in the car. I set my spoon down. Not to talk sense into me. Dad." His voice was quiet and completely certain in the way that quiet voices sometimes are. "I've watched what's been happening for 3 years. The loans, the co-signing, the way Derek talks to you at family dinners like you're a contractor he hired and isn't fully satisfied with." He shook his head once. "I didn't say anything because you didn't ask me to, and because Mom always said you process things in your own time." He looked at me steadily. "But I am not here to talk you out of anything." I picked my spoon back up. Something in my chest, some held tension I had not fully registered, carrying, eased by a degree or two. "I need to tell you what happened Christmas Eve," I said. Okay, Nathan said. Tell me. So I told him. All of it. The flat tire on Millbrook Road. The cookie box. The side path along the house. Derek's voice through the kitchen window, and Caroline's answer, and the particular way she had said it, not cruelly, not with heat, but with the calm of someone discussing a logistical problem they had already worked out. The kitchen light. Thomas Harmon in the best chair. Caroline on her hands and knees on the tile floor with a dish towel, and the green dress with the damp knee, and the smile she had walked back into that living room wearing. Nathan listened, the way he always listened, without interrupting, without the small sounds people make to signal that they are following along, which I had always found more distracting than helpful. He just listened. His soup went slightly cold, and he did not seem to notice. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone who does not know what to say, but the silence of someone letting what they have heard settle into the right place before they respond. Mom would have been in that driveway the next morning, he said finally. She would have had the locksmith there by 8 and a real estate attorney by noon. He paused. Actually, she would have done it that night. She would have called Helen Carter from the car on the way home. I smiled at that. The first real smile in days, pulling at muscles that had not been used for it recently. She would have. I agreed. What you're doing is right, Dad. Nathan said it without flourish, the way he stated facts to his students, not to convince them, but because the fact was simply true and deserved to be said plainly. It's overdue, but it's right. We finished the soup. Nathan washed the bowls without being asked, standing at the sink, the way he had stood at that same sink at 14, at 19, at 25, the particular angle of his shoulders unchanged across all those years. I dried and put them away. Stay tonight, I said. The guest room still has a bed in it. I haven't packed it yet. I was going to ask, he said. I was reaching for the dish towel when my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up, expecting Caroline. She had called twice more since the Derek conversation, and I had let both go, but the name on the screen was one I had not expected tonight. Frank Ellison. Frank had been my attorney for 26 years and my friend for 30. He was the man who had helped Margot and me write our wills, who had handled the paperwork when we refinanced the house in 2009, who played chess with me the second Tuesday of every month at the Elmwood Diner and beat me approximately 60% of the time and never mentioned it afterward. He was not a man who texted in the evenings without a reason. The message read, Ray, I need to talk to you about something. It concerns Caroline. It is not urgent tonight, but I would like to meet in the morning if you are available. I think you should know what I know. I read it twice. Nathan was watching me from across the kitchen with a dish towel over his shoulder and the expression of a man who had learned from years in a classroom how to read a room without appearing to. Everything all right? He asked. I set the phone face up on the counter and looked at the message one more time. Frank Ellison did not use phrases like, I think you should know what I know, without meaning them precisely. I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. But I think tomorrow is going to be a significant day. Before I reveal the shocking truth that changed everything, comment still here below. So I know you're watching with me. And please note, the story ahead includes some dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. If that's not what you're looking for, feel free to turn off the video now. The Elmwood Diner had not changed in 30 years. That was not nostalgia talking. It was a verifiable fact. The same red vinyl booths, the same black and white tile floor worn smooth in the high traffic lanes between the entrance and the counter, the same hand-lettered specials board above the coffee station that had advertised the same 4 items for as long as I could remember. The owner, a compact Greek-American man named Pete, who had inherited the place from his father, operated on the philosophy that if something worked, you left it alone. I had always respected that. Frank was already there when I arrived at 8:15, sitting in the booth second from the window, our booth, the one we had occupied, on the second Tuesday of every month for the better part of a decade. He had coffee in front of him and his reading glasses pushed up on his head, and the particular expression he wore when he had been thinking about something carefully for long enough that he had moved past the discomfort of it and arrived at the plain facts. Frank Ellison was 66 years old, 2 years younger than me, with the kind of face that had always looked simultaneously younger and older than his actual age, unlined in the way of men who do not carry their worries in their expressions, but with eyes that had seen enough to know what they were looking at. He had been a family law attorney for 34 years. He had helped Margot and me draft our wills the year Nathan turned 15, when we had finally admitted to each other that responsible adults did not wait indefinitely to do responsible things. He had never once given me bad advice. I slid into the booth across from him. The waitress, a young woman I did not recognize, appeared immediately with a coffee pot and filled my cup without being asked. That was the Elmwood way. "Thank you for coming," Frank said. "You said it concerned Caroline," I replied. "I was always going to come." He wrapped both hands around his mug. Outside Commerce Street was quiet in the way of late December mornings. A few cars, the pharmacy across the street, just turning its lights on a man walking a dog that was not interested in walking. About 4 months ago, Frank began, Caroline called my office. She said she was calling because she was concerned about you. About your health, your independence, your ability to manage your affairs as you got older. He paused. Those were her words. Ability to manage your affairs. I said nothing. I drank my coffee and I listened. She asked me several questions, Frank continued. She wanted to know about conservatorship. In California and most other states, a conservatorship, sometimes called a guardianship of the estate, is a legal arrangement in which a court appoints someone to manage the financial affairs and assets of a person deemed unable to do so themselves. He said it with the careful precision of a man who had repeated legal definitions often enough that they came out clean and exact. It requires a court petition, a medical evaluation, and a judge's approval. It is not a simple process, and it is not easily granted for someone who is by all evidence entirely competent. She asked about conservatorship, I said. She asked about conservatorship, Frank confirmed. She also asked about power of attorney, specifically whether you had designated anyone and whether that designation could be changed. He looked at me steadily. I told her that you had a durable power of attorney in place and that the details were confidential. I told her that any changes would require your direct involvement and consent. The coffee was good, strong and hot the way diner coffee is supposed to be and frequently is not. I took another sip and set the cup down and looked at the tabletop for a moment. The laminate surface worn to a faint shine at the edges from years of elbows and coffee cups and chess pieces. There is something else, Frank said. I looked up. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper, which he smoothed flat on the table between us. It was a brochure, the glossy trifold kind, the color of institutional beige with a photograph of a building surrounded by carefully maintained landscaping on the front. Across the top, in a font designed to suggest warmth and care, Meadow Creek Senior Living and Memory Care. This arrived at my office 6 weeks ago, Frank said. It was addressed to you. Your full name, Raymond Calloway. But the return contact listed on the request form inside, he opened the brochure to reveal a filled-out information request card tucked in the center fold, was a cell phone number I recognized. I have had that number in my contacts for 7 years. I looked at the request card. The handwriting in the fields was Caroline's. I had seen it on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the notes she used to leave on my kitchen counter when she stopped by. The name in the interested party field, Raymond Calloway. The contact number was hers. She had requested information about a memory care facility. For me, without telling me, without asking me, without any medical basis that I was aware of, because my last physical had been 8 months ago, and my doctor had looked at my charts and said with the mild disappointment of a man who had hoped to find something interesting that I was in excellent health for my age. In the United States, an adult child cannot place a parent in a care facility without either the parent's consent or a court-ordered conservatorship. Caroline would have known this because Frank had told her, which meant the brochure was not a plan in motion. It was a plan being assembled, information gathered, options, researched, the groundwork laid for a future conversation in which I would be presented with a fait accompli dressed up as concern. I picked up the brochure. I looked at the photograph on the front, the building, the landscaping, the careful cheerfulness of the design. Then I set it back down on the table. "She never mentioned any of this to me," I said. "I know," Frank said. "That is why I am mentioning it to you." I sat with it for a moment. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on Commerce Street, and the windows of the Elmwood vibrated slightly, the way they always did when heavy vehicles passed. Pete called something in Greek from behind the counter to someone in the kitchen, and someone in the kitchen called something back. The ordinary world continuing. Frank was watching me with the careful attention of a man who had delivered difficult information to people many times and had learned that the most useful thing he could do afterward was wait. "You did the right thing telling me," I said. "I debated it," Frank admitted. "It is possible she was simply being thorough, planning ahead out of genuine concern." He said it fairly, the way a good attorney says things that cut both ways. But given what you told me last night," he paused. "I know you sent a brief reply after midnight. 3 sentences was enough for me to understand the shape of things. Given the full picture, I thought you deserved to have it." I reached for my coffee. My hand was completely steady. That surprised me slightly, not the steadiness itself, but my awareness of it. The way you notice your own pulse, only when you expect it to be different than it is. "I need to go home and finish packing," I said. Frank nodded. He picked up the brochure and folded it back along its original creases. "Do you want this?" I thought about it for exactly 1 second. "Keep it," I said. "In my file? In case I ever need to remember what I was dealing with." I laid 2 bills on the table for the coffee, put on my coat, and stood up. I heard Derek's car before I saw it. That loose heat shield under the rear panel of his leased Audi had developed a new pitch since the last time I had heard it. Higher, more insistent, the sound of something that had been ignored, past the point where ignoring it was a reasonable option. I was in the study on my knees beside the bookshelf, wrapping the last of Margot's poetry collection in newspaper, when the rattle announced itself from the street, and then cut off as the engine died in my driveway. I did not hurry. I finished wrapping the book. I was holding a slim volume of Mary Oliver that Margot had read so many times the spine had separated completely, and she had taped it back with the careful attention she gave to things she loved. And I set it gently in the box and stood up. By the time I reached the front door, they were already on the porch. Derek had his jaw set in the way of Anne, who had rehearsed this conversation in the car on the way over, and was committed to the version he had prepared. Caroline stood half a step behind him, her hands in her coat pockets, not quite meeting my eyes. I opened the door before they could knock. "Derek," I said. "Caroline." Derek stepped inside without being invited. He looked around at the study visible through the doorway, at the boxes stacked along the hallway walls, at the bare rectangles on the wallpaper where pictures had hung for decades. His expression moved through something complicated. Not grief exactly, more like the particular displeasure of a man watching an asset he had assumed was stationary begin to move. "So you are really doing this," he said. "I am," I said. "The house is under contract as of yesterday morning. A young couple. They have a daughter." Something crossed Caroline's face at that. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. Derek crossed his arms. He was wearing the wool overcoat I had always privately thought was too expensive for a man who complained as frequently as he did about money. And beneath it, the watch I had given him 2 Christmases ago when he made senior partner, a good watch, chosen carefully, engraved on the back with his initials and the date. I had spent more time selecting that watch than he had ever spent asking me how I was doing. "We need to talk about the sale," he said. "About what happens to the proceeds." "What happens to the proceeds?" I said, "Is that they go into my account. My name is on the deed, Derek. It has always been my name on the deed." Caroline grew up in this house. His voice had the controlled volume of a man who had decided that calm authority was more effective than volume, at least to start. "That has to count for something. We factored your support into our financial planning. The new build, the mortgage application, all of it was structured around the assumption that you would be involved." "You structured your financial planning," I said, "around money that was never yours to plan around." I walked to the small folding table I had kept out, specifically because I had known with the certainty of a man who has been paying attention that this conversation was coming. On the table sat the black notebook. I had placed it there that morning, after I came back from the Elmwood diner, in the same deliberate way you set out the materials for a task you intend to complete correctly. I picked it up. I held it for a moment. Then I set it open on the table between us. January 14th, 2022. I said, turning to the first page. $12,400. Roof repair your property on Birchwood Lane. The contractor, you specified the invoice in your name, the check drawn from my account. I turned the page. August 3rd, 2022. $8,500. First semester tuition, Maplewood Academy. Lily's enrollment. Due date the 1st of August, paid the 31st of July. Derek's eyes moved to the notebook. His jaw was still set, but something behind his eyes had shifted the look of a man who had expected a negotiation and found himself in a different kind of room entirely. I kept going. January 2023. Co-signature on the refinancing application, Birchwood Lane property. Loan amount $310,000. My credit history, my assets listed as supplementary collateral. I turned another page. June 2023, $15,000 personal transfer. Described to me at the time as a bridge loan while your bonus was processed. I looked up at Derek. The bonus was processed in August of that year. I have the transfer record. I do not have a repayment. Caroline made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound, the kind that escapes before a person has decided whether they intend to make it. November 2023. I continued. $22,000. Down payment assistance, earnest money deposit on the new build. I closed the notebook. I did not need to read the final entry aloud. The total across 3 years and 4 months of entries is $78,000. Not 1 cent of it has been returned to me. Not 1 cent was offered. The study was very quiet. Outside, a car passed slowly on Clover Street, someone reading the sold sticker that Helen's assistant had placed across the for sale sign yesterday afternoon. Derek uncrossed his arms. He recrossed them. Those were gifts, he said. The confidence in his voice had thinned considerably. You gave that money voluntarily. You can't just— I am not trying to reclaim it, I said. I kept my voice the same temperature it had been since they walked in, not cold, not heated, simply level. Under American law, money given voluntarily without a written loan agreement is generally considered a gift and cannot be recovered. I know that. I am not standing here with this notebook because I intend to take you to court. I picked the notebook up and held it so they could both see it clearly. I am standing here with this notebook so that you understand with complete clarity the size of what you are asking me to continue doing, and so that you understand my answer. I set the notebook back in my jacket pocket. The Bank of Callaway, I said, is permanently closed. Derek's mouth opened. Then it closed. In 31 years of knowing difficult people, contractors, bank officers, the occasional unreasonable neighbor, I had rarely seen a man so thoroughly deprived of his next sentence. Caroline was looking at me now. Not at the floor, not at Derek, at me. Her eyes were dry, but her jaw was tight with the effort of keeping them that way, and her hands had come out of her coat pockets and were pressed flat against the sides of her thighs, the way they had when she was a child, trying very hard to hold herself still. I recognized that posture. I had seen it at Margot's bedside. I had seen it at the funeral. I had seen it in the kitchen window on Christmas Eve when she had walked back into the living room, wearing a smile she did not feel. My daughter was in there somewhere underneath all of this. I had not stopped knowing that, but knowing it was not the same as being responsible for it. I have floors to sweep, I said. I set the notebook in my jacket pocket, picked up the broom that was leaning against the hallway wall, and walked toward the kitchen. Please see yourselves out. The windows in the study had always been the hardest to clean. They faced north, which meant they collected a particular kind of grime, not the honest dust of a room that gets used, but the slow gray film that builds on surfaces that are turned away from the light. Margot had cleaned them every March, without fail, standing on the step stool she kept in the hall closet, working from the top down with the white vinegar solution she mixed herself because she did not trust commercial sprays near her plants. I had taken over the task after she was gone and had never quite matched her results, which she would have found both predictable and endearing. I was on the second window, working the squeegee across the upper pane in the long strokes she had taught me when my phone rang on the windowsill beside me. Nathan. I propped the squeegee against the wall and answered. Dad. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was choosing his words, before he spoke them, not hesitant, just deliberate the way he approached anything that mattered. I heard from Caroline about an hour ago. I thought you should know. Tell me, I said. The loan was denied. He let that settle for a second before he continued. The bank sent the formal notice yesterday. Without your co-signature and without the equity from your house listed as supplementary collateral, their debt-to-income ratio came in too high for the loan amount they applied for. He paused. $320,000 at their current income and existing debt load was always going to be a stretch. You were what made it possible. Without you, the numbers don't work. In the United States, mortgage lenders evaluate applicants using a debt-to-income ratio, the percentage of a borrower's gross monthly income that goes toward debt payments. Most conventional lenders require this ratio to stay below 43%. A cosigner with strong credit and documented assets can bring a borderline application across that threshold. Remove the cosigner and the collateral simultaneously, and a borderline application becomes a denied one. It is arithmetic, not judgment. Did the earnest money, I said. At risk, Nathan said. $35,000. They did not include a financing contingency clause in the purchase agreement. He said it carefully, the way he delivered disappointing information to students factually, without softening it to the point of dishonesty. A financing contingency would have allowed them to exit the contract and recover the deposit if the loan fell through. Without it, the seller has grounds to keep the deposit. I looked out the north window at the backyard. The snow had melted and refrozen twice in the past week, and the garden beds were a dull gray-brown, the stone borders Margot had laid one summer weekend with Nathan's help visible above the frost line. The yard looked the way things look when they are between seasons not quite finished, with one thing not quite ready for the next. "How is Caroline?" I asked. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "She called me from the car. She was—" He chose the word carefully, unraveling a little. Not crying exactly, more like a person who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has just been told they have to keep holding it. I understood that description precisely. "Derek," I said, "that is the other thing." Nathan's voice shifted by a degree, still even but with something underneath it that I recognized as controlled anger, the kind Nathan had always kept on a very short leash, because he had inherited his mother's understanding that anger spent carelessly was anger wasted. Caroline said that when the denial came through, Derek's first response was to tell her that this was her fault. That if she had not said what she said on Christmas Eve, you would never have done any of this, and they would have the loan and the house and everything would be fine. I set the squeegee down on the windowsill. Outside, a bird landed on the stone border of the nearest garden bed, looked at the frozen ground with the frank disappointment of a creature who had arrived somewhere expecting more than it found, and flew away. "He is wrong about that," I said. "I know he is," Nathan said. "What happened on Christmas Eve did not cause this. What happened on Christmas Eve showed me something that had been true for a long time before that night." I picked up the squeegee again and looked at the window I had not yet finished. I was not supporting them because I believed they needed it. I was supporting them because I had convinced myself that was what a good father did. Those are not the same thing. Nathan did not respond immediately. That was one of the things I had always valued most about my son, his willingness to let a statement exist in the air for a moment, before deciding what to do with it. "Mom used to say something about that," he said finally. "She said there was a difference between helping someone and handing them a reason not to try." "She was right," I said. "She usually was." I finished the second window. The north light came through cleaner now, not bright. The sky was overcast, but clear in the way that honest light is clear, showing things as they are, rather than as you might prefer them to be. "The moving company is confirmed for Friday," I said. 8 in the morning. "I will be there," Nathan said. No hesitation, no qualification, just the plain statement of a man whose word meant what it said. "You don't have to take another day off, Dad." His voice was quiet and completely final. "I will be there." I looked around the study one more time. The shelves were empty. The boxes were stacked and labeled in my own handwriting along the wall. The folding table where I had laid out the black notebook 4 days ago was collapsed and leaning against the doorframe, ready to go to the curb. The room looked the way rooms look when they have been emptied of everything that made them specific, larger than you remembered, and somehow less itself. 31 years of mornings and evenings and ordinary Tuesdays in this house. 31 years of the particular creak of the third stair and the way the kitchen light hummed for 30 seconds before it fully warmed up, and the smell of coffee and the sound of Margot's voice calling from the bedroom that breakfast was ready, though she knew I would be down before she finished the sentence. I was not leaving those things behind. Those things were already gone. I was leaving the house. There was a difference. "Friday at 8. I said. "Friday at 8. Nathan confirmed. I will bring the coffee. I ended the call. I picked up the window spray and the roll of paper towels and moved to the last window in the study, the one that faced east, the one that in the mornings had caught the early light and thrown it across the floor in a long rectangle that Margot's cat, gone now 12 years, had occupied every single day without fail. I cleaned the window carefully, top to bottom, the way she had taught me. Then I folded the step stool, carried it to the hallway, and set it beside the boxes. I was ready. The moving truck arrived at 7:58. I know because I was standing on the front porch with a cup of coffee when it turned onto Clover Street, and I looked at my watch out of habit. The same watch I had worn for 23 years, a birthday gift from Margot that kept better time than any watch I had owned before or since. 2 minutes early. In my experience, people who show up 2 minutes early are people who understand that being on time is a form of respect, and I had always found it easy to work with people who understood that. Nathan was already inside, moving through the house with a clipboard and the focused efficiency he brought to anything logistical. He had arrived at 7:15 with 2 coffees from the drive-thru on Route 9 and the easy manner of a man who had slept well and knew what he was there to do. We had not talked much that morning. We did not need to. There is a particular kind of companionship that exists between people who have worked alongside each other long enough that the work itself becomes the conversation. And Nathan and I had always had that. The crew was 4 men, professional and unhurried, and they moved through the house with the practiced rhythm of people who had emptied other people's lives into boxes many times before and had learned to do it without sentiment getting in the way of efficiency. I had packed everything myself, every box labeled, every fragile item, wrapped every piece of furniture, disassembled where it needed to be. The foreman, a broad-shouldered man named Curtis, who wore a company jacket and communicated primarily in short declarative sentences, looked at my labeling system when he came in and said, "Nice work," in the tone of a man who had seen the alternative often enough to appreciate its absence. I stayed out of their way. That was the job now, to direct when asked, and otherwise let capable people do capable work. Gloria appeared at 9:15. She came across the lawn from her house 4 doors down, moving carefully over the patches of ice that the morning sun had not yet reached, carrying a thermos in one hand and a white paper bag in the other. She was wearing her heavy winter coat, the dark green one she had worn every winter since I could remember, and her silver hair was tucked under a wool hat that I suspected had belonged to her late husband. "I made a fresh pot," she said, holding up the thermos. "And I stopped at Hargrove's for those cinnamon rolls you like. The ones with the thick icing." Hargrove's bakery was 11 blocks away. She had gone there this morning before 8 to get something specific for a neighbor who was moving out of a house he had lived in for 31 years. I set my coffee cup down on the porch railing and accepted the bag. I looked inside. 4 cinnamon rolls iced exactly the way I liked them, the kind of thing that takes 30 seconds to hand someone and represents something much larger than itself. "Thank you, Gloria," I said. She waved it off with the brisk efficiency of a woman who was uncomfortable with gratitude directed at her. "You have been a good neighbor for 19 years, she said. "The least I can do is make sure you leave with something decent in your stomach." She looked past me at the house, at the movers carrying boxes through the front door, at the truck in the driveway, with its ramp extended and its cargo bay half full. "You are doing the right thing," she said. Not for the first time, but with the quiet certainty of someone who meant it more each time. By 10:30, the truck was nearly full. Curtis and his crew had worked through the house systematically, room by room, and what had taken me 31 years to accumulate had taken them less than 3 hours to load. The last piece of furniture to come out was Margot's reading chair, the one I had kept by the window in the bedroom, the one she had sat in every night before sleep, with whatever book she was working through, at the time the one I had reupholstered twice. because I could not bring myself to replace it with something that did not hold the particular shape of her in its cushions. Two of the movers carried it out together, careful with it, in the way people are careful with things when the person overseeing the move has been careful with everything else. I watched it come through the front door and down the porch steps and up the ramp into the truck, and I felt something move through me. Not grief. I had done most of the grieving for this house in private over the past 3 weeks, but a kind of completion, the feeling of a door closing that you have been holding open for longer than you needed to. Nathan came and stood beside me on the front lawn. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Gloria, standing a few feet to my left, straightened slightly and said in a voice that carried no particular emphasis, "Car." I looked. A silver SUV had turned onto Clover Street from the north end. The loose heat shield was quiet today. The temperature had dropped overnight, and cold sometimes stilled it temporarily, the way cold stills a lot of things. Caroline parked at the curb behind the moving truck and sat in the car for a moment before she got out. She was alone. She had left Lily somewhere with a neighbor with Derek's mother I did not know. She was wearing the dark wool coat she had bought herself 2 winters ago, the practical one rather than the fashionable one, and her hair was down. She looked tired in the specific way of a person who had not been sleeping well, rather than the general way of a person who had had a long day. She walked up the front path and stopped 10 feet from where Nathan and I were standing. She looked at the truck. She looked at the sold sticker slapped diagonally across the real estate sign on the lawn. Helen's assistant had put it there 4 days ago, bright red against the white background. She looked at the house itself at the front door, standing open for the last time at the empty windows. "Oh, you really sold it," she said. Her voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone finally acknowledging a thing they had been unable to believe until they were standing in front of the evidence. "I did," I said. "A young couple. They have a daughter about Lily's age. They close in 3 weeks." Caroline looked at the house for another moment. Then she looked down at the front path, the stone path she had walked up and down for the first 22 years of her life, that she had learned to ride a bicycle on, that she had come up in a prom dress and in a wedding dress, and with a newborn daughter in a car seat, and with grocery bags, and with her hands empty and with her hands full. "The loan was denied," she said. "Nathan told me," I said. A pause. The movers were quiet behind us, giving the moment its space without being asked. "Derek says it is my fault," she said quietly. Her voice did not break. It just thinned the way a voice does when the person using it is working very hard to keep it together and mostly succeeding. "He has been saying it every day since the notice came." I looked at my daughter, at the tiredness around her eyes and the way she was holding her coat closed at the throat with one hand, even though it was buttoned. At the particular stillness of a person who has been absorbing something painful for long enough that they have stopped flinching. "The denial notice did not cause your problems, Caroline," I said. "It described them. There is a difference." She did not argue. She did not look away. Nathan put his hand briefly on my shoulder, one firm, quiet pressure, and then walked toward Curtis to confirm the final load. I looked at my daughter for another moment. Then I zipped my jacket against the cold. "Take care of yourself," I said. "Take care of Lily." I turned and walked toward Nathan and the truck, and what came next, leaving the past where it had always been behind me and entirely my own. The key was smaller than I expected. That sounds like a strange thing to notice, but after 31 years of carrying the same brass house key on the same ring, a key I had cut 3 copies of over the decades, that I knew by weight and shape without looking, the new key felt unfamiliar in my hand. Lighter. A modern cut, the kind that slides into an electronic deadbolt rather than a tumbler lock. I stood in the hallway of the third floor of the Lakeview Terrace building with the moving crew waiting behind me and Nathan standing to my left, and I looked at this small silver key for exactly 1 moment before I put it in the lock and turned it. The door swung open. The afternoon light came in first, winter light, thin and pale, but coming in from two directions at once. Because the living room had windows on the south wall and the east wall, both, and at this hour it caught the dust motes, still settling from the move, and turned them gold. I stepped inside. The floors were hardwood lighter than the floors on Clover Street, and my footsteps sounded different on them, cleaner somehow, with less history in the echo. Curtis and his crew brought everything in efficiently, the same way they had taken it out. Nathan directed traffic from the center of the living room, clipboard in hand, pointing each piece of furniture toward the room it belonged in without hesitation. He had memorized the floor plan from the listing photos I had shown him in November, and he moved through the space with the confident orientation of someone who had already lived there in their imagination. Margot's reading chair went to the corner by the east window. I had decided that before I even the lease had stood in this room during the showing with the property manager, and looked at that corner and known with the certainty of someone who has arranged furniture in the same house for 3 decades, that it was exactly right. The light would hit it in the mornings. She would have approved of that. When the last box was in and Curtis had his crew do a final sweep of the truck, I shook his hand at the door. He had a good handshake, firm, brief, the kind that does not require anything supplementary. "Good luck in the new place," he said. I thanked him. I meant it. Nathan and I stood in the living room after they left, looking at the organized chaos of a life not yet unpacked. Boxes stacked along the walls, furniture in approximately the right places, the particular disorder of transition that is somehow different from the disorder of neglect, purposeful rather than accumulated. "Coffee," Nathan said. It was not a question. He found the coffee maker in the box labeled Kitchen Essentials and had it running in 4 minutes. I found the mugs in the box beside it. 2 ceramic mugs Margot had bought at a craft fair in Vermont. The summer Nathan turned 16, solid and slightly uneven, the way handmade things are the kind of objects that outlast almost everything else. I set them on the counter and watched the coffee brew and felt for the first time in 3 weeks the specific sensation of being somewhere rather than leaving somewhere. We sat on the couch, still pushed slightly, wrong not yet in its final position, and drank the coffee and looked out the south window at the lake. The water was steel gray in the January light flat, and still with a thin line of darker gray at the far shore, where the tree line began. A single gull was working the near shore, methodical and unbothered, and we watched it for a while without saying anything. "Mom would have had plants on every inch of that balcony by March," Nathan said. "By February," I said. "She would have started the seedlings inside in January and moved them out the minute the temperature allowed it. She would have driven the building manager slightly crazy, asking about the weight limits on the railing." Nathan laughed, a real laugh, uncalculated, the kind that comes out before you decide to laugh. I had not heard that sound in a while. It filled the new room well. We unpacked until 6. Not everything the books would take another day, and the study was still mostly boxes, but enough that the apartment felt inhabited rather than temporary. Enough that the kitchen was functional and the bedroom had a made bed, and Margot's chair sat exactly where it belonged in the corner by the east window with the small side table beside it, and the lamp adjusted to the right height. At 6:15, Nathan put on his coat. "You should stay for dinner," I said. "I can put something together. You have 3 boxes of dishes still in bubble wrap, and nothing in the refrigerator," he said. "I will stop at Carlucci's on the way out of town. They will still be open. You do not have to, Dad." He said it with the particular patience of a son who has had this conversation before and intends to win it without raising his voice. Let me do something useful. I walked him to the door. He pulled me into a brief, solid embrace, the kind that does not linger past the point of comfort, the kind that says what it means to say, and then releases. Call me any time, he said, stepping back. Not just when things go wrong. I know, I said. I mean it. I know you mean it. He left. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to his footsteps recede down the corridor. Then I walked back into the living room and stood at the south window and looked out at the lake in the early evening darkness. The gull was gone. The water had gone from steel gray to black, and the lights from the far shore were beginning to show their reflections on the surface, long and trembling. I was 68 years old, and I was standing in a two-bedroom apartment I had chosen for myself, for reasons that had nothing to do with proximity to anyone else's needs, or convenience, or expectation. The balcony was bare. The kitchen was mostly unpacked. The east window corner held Margot's chair, and the right light and 31 years of knowing what it felt like to sit there. Gloria called at 7:30. "How is it?" she asked without preamble, the way Gloria always asked things. "Quiet," I said. I was standing on the balcony with my coat on, looking at the lake. The cold was sharp and clean, the kind that clarifies rather than numbs. "It is very quiet." "Good quiet or hard quiet?" she asked. I considered the question honestly, the way it deserved to be considered. "Good," I said. "Mostly good." "That is enough for the first night," Gloria said. "That is more than enough." After we hung up, I went inside and made myself a simple dinner from the canned goods I had packed in the pantry basics box, and ate it at the small table by the south window, looking at the lake and the lights and the dark water moving almost imperceptibly in the January wind. My phone sat on the table beside my plate. At 8:47, the screen lit up with a text from a number I recognized. "Caroline, Dad, can we talk? Not about anything. Just talk." I read it twice. I set the phone face down beside my plate. Outside, the lake moved in the darkness, unhurried, and entirely itself, going nowhere, and arriving exactly where it needed to be. I finished my dinner. I found the box on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after moving in. It had been sitting in the corner of the second bedroom, the room I had designated as the study where the bookshelves were going, once I finished assembling them under 2 other boxes labeled Desk Items and Office Misc. The box I found was smaller than the others, taped shut with the brown packing tape I had used on everything labeled in my own handwriting, Study Misc. I did not remember packing it. That was not unusual. By the end of the packing process, I had been working on autopilot, moving through the desk drawers and the filing cabinet and the small wooden tray on the corner of the desk, where I kept the things that did not belong anywhere specific. I sat down on the floor of the half-assembled study with the box between my knees and cut the tape with my pocket knife. Inside, a rubber band ball Nathan had made as a child and somehow migrated into my desk over the decades. A broken compass, 3 pens that likely no longer worked, a folded paper that turned out to be a receipt from a hardware store dated 11 years ago. And underneath all of it, held together with a single pale blue rubber band that had gone slightly brittle with age, a stack of small envelopes. They were the kind of envelopes that come in sets at the craft store, small and square, made for notes and cards rather than letters, in shades of yellow and green and pink. 9 of them, each one sealed, each one addressed in the same handwriting, which changed across the stack the way a child's handwriting changes as they grow rounder at the bottom, more deliberate at the top, but was recognizable throughout as the same hand. The name on the front of each envelope was mine. I picked up the bottom one first. The handwriting was the youngest, loose and large, the letters working hard to stay between invisible lines. The return address in the upper left corner was the Birchwood Lane address. I turned it over. The flap was sealed with a small sticker, a cartoon fish, the kind that comes on a sheet of 100 from a dollar store display. I opened it carefully, the way you open something when you understand that care is called for. Inside was a card made from a folded piece of construction paper, yellow with a drawing on the front in orange crayon. The drawing showed two figures, one tall, one small, standing beside what appeared to be a body of water with a curved line above it that I interpreted as a fishing rod in mid-cast. Beneath the drawing, in the same effortful handwriting as the envelope, "Happy Birthday, Grandpa. I drawed you fishing because you like it. Love, Lily, age 7. I sat with that for a moment. Then I opened the next one. Happy birthday, Grandpa. I made this card myself. Mom helped me with the glitter, but I did the drawing. Sorry the fish look weird. I think they are good fish anyway. Love, Lily, age 8. The card was purple construction paper. There were, in fact, glitter remnants still clinging to the fold, catching the afternoon light from the study window. The fish were enthusiastically shaped, round-bodied, spiky-finned, the kind of fish that has never existed in any ocean, but that an 8-year-old draws with complete conviction. I set it beside the first one on the floor and opened the third. Dear Grandpa, I made you a birthday card, but Mom said you were very busy and might not have time to read it right now. I hope you are not too busy. I drew you a cardinal because you said one time they were your favorite bird. Happy birthday. Love, Lily, age 9. The cardinal on the front was red. It sat on a brown branch against a blue sky, small and precise, the kind of drawing a child makes when they are trying very hard rather than drawing freely. She had been paying attention. She had remembered a thing I said in passing one time in conversation. I had mentioned that cardinals were my favorite winter bird because they were the only thing that stayed red when everything else went gray, and she had carried it forward into a birthday card I had never received. I put the third card down. My back was against the wall of the half-assembled study. The afternoon light was coming through the east window, the one that in the mornings would throw its rectangle across the floor the way the window on Clover Street had done. And I thought about that for a moment, about how light does the same things in different rooms, how certain qualities of afternoon follow you from one place to another, regardless of the address. I opened the remaining 6 cards one at a time. Age 9, a second one. She had made 2 that year, apparently, because the first one she had decided was not good enough. Age 10, a card with a poem she had written herself, 4 lines rhyming carefully. Age 10, again, a second attempt, this one with a photograph glued to the front, a printed image of a lake that looked remarkably like the view from my new balcony, though she could not have known that. The last one was different. No drawing, no construction paper. A plain white card, the kind you buy in a box of 20 from the drugstore. The handwriting on the inside was older than the others, more controlled, more deliberate, but with something in the letter pressure that suggested it had been written carefully rather than casually. Dear Grandpa, I made you cards every year, but I don't think you got them. Mom says you are very busy, but I don't think that is really why. I miss you. I hope you are okay. I hope you are not lonely. I put a stamp on this one myself. Love, Lily. She had put a stamp on it herself. I looked at the envelope. There was indeed a stamp in the upper right corner, a forever stamp slightly crooked, applied with the determined pressure of a child who intended this one to actually arrive. The envelope was sealed. It had never been mailed. I sat on the floor of my half-unpacked study for a long time. The rubber band ball from Nathan's childhood sat on top of the open box. The 3 broken pens. The 11-year-old hardware receipt. The 9 cards from my granddaughter spread on the floor around me in a loose arc, each one a year she had thought of me and tried to reach me and been quietly, consistently prevented from doing so. She had put a stamp on the last one herself. I picked up my phone. I opened the text thread with Nathan. We had been texting logistics for the past 3 weeks. Short, practical messages about boxes and furniture and building parking, and I typed, "Did you know Caroline never sent Lily's birthday cards to me, 9 of them? I just found them in a box." I set the phone down. I looked at the cards on the floor around me. 2 minutes and 14 seconds later, Nathan replied, "No. I didn't know." "I'm sorry, Dad." I read the message. I set the phone aside. Then I gathered the 9 cards, carefully stacked them in the order I had opened them, youngest to oldest, age 7, to the one with the stamp, and held the stack in both hands for a moment. Feeling the slight weight of them, the years represented in that small thickness of construction paper and white cardstock and dried glitter and orange crayon, I carried them to the bedroom and put them in the drawer of the nightstand where I would see them every morning. Tomorrow, I decided I would find a way to see Lily. The doorbell rang at 9:17 on Sunday morning. I was in the kitchen, still in my bathrobe, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. I had slept better than I expected, better than I had any particular right to, given what I had found the night before, and I had woken up with the 9 cards arranged in my mind, the way you arrange things you intend to do something about, not painfully, but purposefully. I had been thinking about how to reach Lily without going through Caroline or Derek. I had not arrived at a clean answer yet. I was not expecting anyone. I tightened the belt of my bathrobe and walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Gloria was standing in the hallway with her heavy green coat on, and her wool hat and her canvas tote bag over one arm. Beside her, standing very straight in a red wool coat, with her dark hair in 2 braids, and a folded piece of paper held in both hands in front of her, like something official, was Lily. I stood at the peephole for 1 full second. Then I opened the door. Lily looked up at me with the particular expression of a child who has rehearsed what she intends to say, and is now deciding whether the rehearsed version is still the right one. She was taller than I remembered. That happened with children. You did not see them for a stretch, and then you did, and the change that had been accumulating invisibly all at once became visible, and you had to adjust. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Gloria met my eyes over Lily's head with the expression of a woman who had been recruited into a logistics operation by a 10-year-old and had found the assignment entirely reasonable. "She called my cell phone yesterday evening," Gloria said. "She got the number from Caroline's phone contacts when Caroline wasn't looking. She asked if I could drive her over this morning." She paused. I told her I would think about it, and then I immediately decided yes. I looked at Lily. "You called Gloria?" "I found your new address in Mom's email," Lily said with the calm practicality of a child who had solved a problem and saw no reason to apologize for the method. "But I don't have a license, so I needed a ride." Gloria was the only person I could think of who would say yes and not tell Mom first. Gloria made a small sound that in a less composed woman might have been a laugh. I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. "Both of you. I just made coffee." Gloria settled at the kitchen table with her coffee and the quiet efficiency of a woman making herself useful by making herself unobtrusive. Lily came into the living room and looked around the apartment with the careful attention of a child cataloging a new environment. The bookshelves still half filled the boxes in the corner of the study. The lake visible through the south window, gray and wide, and still in the February morning light. "It's a smaller than your old house," she said. "It is," I agreed. "I like it better," she said, with the decisive certainty of someone who had thought about it and arrived at a conclusion. "It feels like you." I did not know exactly what she meant by that, but it landed somewhere specific in my chest, warm and precise, and I did not ask her to explain it. She turned from the window and held out the folded piece of paper she had been carrying since the door. "I made you something," she said. "It's not a birthday card. I know your birthday isn't until April, it's just—" She stopped, reconsidered. "I wanted you to have something from me that you actually got." I took the paper and unfolded it. It was a drawing done in colored pencil on a piece of notebook paper, careful and detailed in the way her drawings had become careful and detailed as she had gotten older. Not the round orange fish of the age 7 card, but something more observed, more specific. Two figures sitting side by side on a dock over water. The taller figure held a fishing rod. The smaller figure sat close beside legs dangling over the edge, looking at the water rather than at the rod. In the upper right corner of the drawing, in small, neat letters, "Grandpa and me. Someday." I folded the drawing back along its original creases. I held it in both hands for a moment. My throat tightened in the way that it tightens when you are not going to cry, but your body wants to register that something significant has happened. "Thank you," I said. "I am going to put this on the refrigerator." Lily watched me cross to the kitchen and find a magnet in the kitchen misc box and affix the drawing to the refrigerator door at approximately eye level for a 10-year-old. She watched me step back and look at it. Then she came and stood beside me and looked at it too. "Grandpa," she said without looking away from the drawing. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were lonely. I thought you just—" She stopped again. When she started again, her voice was careful and steady in the way that children's voices get when they are saying something they have been working up to. "I thought you just didn't want to see us very much. Mom always said you were busy. But Gloria told me that when someone who loves you doesn't come around, it's usually not because they're busy." I crouched down to her level, my knees registering the cold of the kitchen floor through the thin fabric of my bathrobe in a way they would not have 10 years ago. I looked at her face. Margot's eyes, my own jaw, some combination of features that had been assembled from two families and become entirely her own. 10 years old, and already trying to understand things that adults spent decades avoiding. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "Not one thing. Not ever." Her lower lip pressed together. Her chin moved slightly. She held it. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around my neck and held on with the complete physical commitment that children bring to embraces the kind that does not leave anything in reserve. And I put my arms around her and held her back. And we stayed like that for a moment in the kitchen of my new apartment, while the coffee maker finished its cycle, and Gloria looked out the kitchen window at the lake with the studious attention of a woman who understood that some moments were not for witnesses. When Lily pulled back, her eyes were bright but dry. She was her mother's daughter in that way, too, determined not to fall apart in front of an audience, working very hard at it, mostly succeeding. "Can I come on Sundays?" she asked. Gloria said she could drive me. Or maybe Nathan could. Or maybe I could just take the bus when I'm older. "Every Sunday," I said. I stood back up slowly, one hand briefly on her shoulder for balance. "I will make sure there are cookies. The ginger ones. The ones from Christmas Eve," she said immediately. "The ones from Christmas Eve," I confirmed. She nodded, satisfied in the decisive way she had of closing a matter once it had been settled to her satisfaction. Then she turned and walked back into the living room to look at the lake again, leaving me standing in the kitchen with the drawing on the refrigerator and the coffee brewed and Gloria at the table giving me the quiet, steady look of a woman who had seen something good happen and intended to let it be what it was without commentary. I poured 3 cups of coffee. I put milk in Lily's without asking, because I had always known she took it with milk, and set the cookies Gloria had brought snickerdoodles from Hargrove's still warm on the plate between us. We sat at the table, the 3 of us, and looked at the lake. March came in the way it always does in this part of the country. Not gently, not all at once, but in argument with itself one warm afternoon, followed by 3 cold mornings, the snow retreating and retreating again until sometime around the middle of the month it simply gave up and stayed gone. I noticed the change from the balcony. I had developed the habit of going out there with my first cup of coffee every morning, regardless of a temperature. In February, it had required the heavy coat and the wool scarf Margot had knitted me the winter before she got sick, the one I had worn every cold season since, not out of sentiment exactly, but because it was a good scarf and she had made it long enough to wrap twice. By the middle of March, I was out there in just the flannel shirt watching the lake change color as the light changed gray in the early morning, then silver, then something closer to blue as the sun climbed. The garden club met on Tuesday evenings in the basement of the community center, 4 blocks from Lakeview Terrace. I had seen the flyer on the bulletin board in the building lobby 3 weeks after moving in, a photocopied sheet, slightly crooked, advertising the Lakeview Community Garden Club spring season beginning in March. All skill levels, welcome plot rentals available. I had stood in front of it for 30 seconds and then taken a photograph of it with my phone, which I told myself was not the same as committing to anything. I went to the first meeting. There were 11 people in the basement of the community center, seated on folding chairs in a rough circle ranging in age from a young woman who appeared to be in her late 20s to a man named Howard, who was 83 and had been growing tomatoes in this city for 60 years and had opinions about soil pH that he was willing to defend at length. The group's coordinator, a practical woman in her 40s named Patrice, who wore gardening gloves tucked into her back pocket even indoors, handed me a plot assignment sheet and a packet of information about the community beds and did not make a fuss about my being new. I rented a 4x8 plot on the south side of the garden, which got good afternoon sun. By April, I had tomatoes started from seed on the balcony windowsill, 6 varieties labeled with the wooden craft sticks I had bought at the hardware store set in the south-facing window where the light was strongest in the mornings. Margot had always started her seeds in March, which she said gave them the right amount of head start, and I was a month behind her schedule, but the seeds did not seem to hold it against me. They came up green and determined, pushing through the soil with the unreasonable optimism of things that do not know yet what they are growing into. Lily came every Sunday. That was the constant around which the rest of the week arranged itself. By the 3rd Sunday, she had claimed the left side of the couch as specifically hers and had begun keeping a paperback book in the tote bag she brought with her, which she read on the couch, while I made lunch comfortable in the silence between us. The way people are comfortable in silence when they have decided that the other person's presence is enough without requiring it to be filled. We made Margot's cookie recipe together on the 4th Sunday, the ginger ones from the index card in Margot's handwriting that I had kept in the recipe box for 30 years. Lily was precise about measurements in the way that children who take things seriously are precise, leveling off the flour with the back of a knife, the way I showed her. And when the first batch came out of the oven, slightly darker on the bottom than ideal, she examined one carefully and said, "I think the rack was too low," which was exactly right. Nathan came down the first weekend of every month. We settled into a rhythm of it. He arrived Saturday morning with coffee from the drive-thru on Route 9, and we spent the day doing whatever needed doing, which in April meant assembling the remaining bookshelves, and in May meant driving out to the garden center 40 minutes north that Nathan had found online because it had the specific heirloom tomato varieties I had mentioned wanting. We ate lunch at whatever was open and talked about his students and the book I was reading, and the news which we both followed and disagreed about occasionally, in the productive way of people who trust each other enough to disagree. On the second Saturday of May, we went fishing. There was a spot on the east side of the lake, accessible by a gravel path through the park, where this bank widened into a shallow flat, and the water was slow and clear over a sandy bottom. I had found it on a Tuesday morning walk in April and had filed it away. Nathan brought his own rod, the one I had given him when he turned 14, which he had apparently kept all this time in the closet of the house he and his wife owned upstate, and we sat on the bank for 3 hours in the May morning and talked when we wanted to, and did not talk when we did not want to, and between us caught exactly 2 small bass that we returned to the water. Mom used to say fishing was an excuse to sit outside and think. Nathan said at some point during the second hour, his rod propped against his knee, his face turned up toward the sun. She wasn't wrong, I said. She used to come with me sometimes, even though she never held the rod. She said watching someone else fish was as good as fishing and got your hands less dirty. Nathan laughed. It echoed slightly off the water. My savings account I had noticed in April, when I sat down to review my finances for the first time since the move had increased by a number that surprised me until I thought about it, and then did not surprise me at all. $78,000 across 3 years amounts to $26,000 a year, which amounts to just over $2,000 a month, which is what I had been subsidizing without fully accounting for it. Removed from the equation, my retirement income was not only sufficient, it was comfortable in a way I had not allowed myself to notice before. I bought a good coffee maker, the kind Margot had always wanted and which I had said was excessive. She had been right about that too. In late May, Gloria and I began walking the lake path on Wednesday mornings. It had started accidentally. We had left the building at the same time one Wednesday, both heading to the park, and had walked together without discussing it. And the following Wednesday, it had simply happened again. She talked about her garden and her late husband and the books she was reading and asked me questions about mine. It was easy company, the kind that does not require effort to sustain. One Wednesday, she asked about Caroline. She texts occasionally, I said. We were on the far side of the lake where the path curved through a stand of old oaks that were just coming into full leaf. I read them. I have not responded yet. But you read them? Gloria said. I read them, I confirmed. Gloria nodded in the way of someone filing a piece of information in the correct place. That is something, she said. It is, I agreed. The oaks were very green overhead, and the lake was visible through them in pieces blue and silver and moving. Nathan called that evening. Dad! He said, his voice carrying the careful quality it always got when he was about to say something that mattered. I heard from Caroline today. She sounds different than she has in a while. He paused. The marriage is bad, Dad. I think it is really bad. I was standing on the balcony with the last of my coffee watching the evening light go off the water. How is Lily? I asked. Lily is okay, Nathan said. But Caroline. He stopped, started again. She needs to walk through this herself, I know. I just thought you should know what I'm hearing. I looked out at the lake. The drawing on the refrigerator was visible through the glass door behind me, 2 figures on a dock, the smaller one's legs dangling over the water. Thank you for telling me, I said. Lily arrived that Sunday with red eyes and said nothing about them. She hung her coat on the hook by the door, went to her side of the couch, and opened her paperback. I went back to the kitchen and finished making her hot cocoa I had started when I heard Gloria's car pull up, and I brought it out and set it on the side table next to her, and sat down in the armchair across from her and picked up my own book. His mother didn't say anything. She just kept eating, I thought about Thomas Harmon in the best chair by the fireplace on Christmas Eve refilling his wine glass, while Caroline scrubbed the floor 12 feet away. The apple had not fallen far. What your father says about fault, I said carefully, is not something you need to carry. I know, she said, in the tone of a child who knows something but cannot make her body agree. But I hear it. I can't not hear it. No, I said, you can't. And that is not fair to you. She held the mug in both hands and looked at the lake. Outside, a family of ducks moved along the near shore. The mother in front, 4 ducklings trailing in decreasing order of size, each one working harder than the situation required. Mom cries at night, Lily said. She thinks I'm asleep. I looked at my granddaughter. 10 years old, absorbing things that adults twice her age would struggle to carry, doing it with the particular quiet resilience of someone who had not yet been told how hard it was. Do you still love Mom? She asked. Even after everything, she is my daughter, I said. That does not have an off switch. Lily considered this. Then she picked up her book again, which meant she had gotten what she came for. Nathan called after Gloria took Lily home. I was on the balcony, the June air warm, the tomato seedlings moved to the railing 2 weeks ago when the nights finally held above 50 degrees. Caroline called me twice this week, he said. The second time she was actually crying. Not performing it, actually crying. He paused. Derek told his parents the loan fell through because of her. Thomas Harmon told Derek he had made a poor choice of partner. Derek did not disagree. No, I said. I did not imagine he would. She is still with him, Nathan said. She told me the idea of starting over was more frightening than staying. I understood that more than I wanted to. I had stayed in things past their useful life for exactly that reason. It was one of the more persistent failures of human reasoning, and I had never been immune to it. She needs to walk through this herself, I said. I cannot carry her. I tried carrying people for 5 years, and it helped no one, including me. Nathan was quiet. Then, I just want to fix it. She gets that from Margot, I said. Margot could not watch someone struggle without wanting to hand them the answer. It drove me crazy. It was also one of the best things about her. Yeah, Nathan said softly. It was. That night at 11:43, my phone lit up. Caroline, I just need to talk to my dad. The 9 birthday cards were in the nightstand drawer 6 inches from my hand. The drawing was on the refrigerator, visible as a pale rectangle from where I lay. I typed 4 words, come Sunday. Bring lunch. Then I closed my eyes and listened to the lake outside moving forward one moment at a time, not toward anything in particular, arriving exactly where it needed to. She knocked. Not the knock of someone testing whether they were still welcome, but the knock of someone who understood that welcome was no longer assumed and was willing to wait and find out. I had been up since 6, standing on the balcony with my coffee, deciding not to prepare anything to say. Prepared words land wrong in unscripted moments. Whatever this morning needed, it needed to be honest. I opened the door. Caroline stood in the hallway holding a glass baking dish, still warm, covered in foil with steam curling at the edges. Dark wool coat, practical. Hair down, simply done. No pearl earrings, no handbag. She looked like my daughter, not the version I had been negotiating with for years, but the earlier one. The one who called from college when her car broke down and led with the story before she led with the need. Come in, I said. We sat at the small table by the south window with coffee between us and the lake outside, and the morning light lying flat and neutral across the table. She told me they had been spending 40% more than they earned for 2 years. that she had made a spreadsheet, canceled the country club, called the leasing company about Derek's car. He said I was punishing him, she said. I told him I was doing arithmetic. Her mouth moved at the corner, not a smile, but the ghost of one. Then she set her mug down and looked at me steadily. I used you, Dad. I let Derek use you. I told myself stories about why it was okay, and none of them were true. Her hands tightened around the ceramic. I'm sorry. Not because things fell apart. Because of how I saw you. You deserved better than how I saw you. I thought about Margot. About what she would do, not a speech, not ceremony. Just the simplest, true thing. I reached across and lifted the foil from the corner of the dish. The lasagna was layered perfectly, cheese browned, exactly right pasta, slightly uneven the way homemade pasta is. The lasagna looks good, Caroline, I said. She let out a breath she had been holding longer than this conversation. Mom's recipe, she said quietly. I've been making it once a month trying to get it right. I think this one is finally right. I got 2 plates from the cabinet. Let's find out, I said. The snow started falling at 7:15, large, unhurried flakes, the decorative kind that has nowhere particular to be. I left early. That was deliberate. Last Christmas Eve I had left late and arrived at a house where I was not wanted. This year I took my time, and the difference between those 2 drives was the entire distance of the past 12 months. I drove past the turn for Birchwood Lane without looking down it. Not avoidance, simply irrelevance. Nathan's truck was already in the parking lot when I arrived. Of course it was. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, put my key in the lock, and opened the door to the smell of garlic and rosemary, and something that had been in the oven long enough to mean it. Lily came around the corner from the kitchen before I had my coat off. 7 minutes late, she announced. Last year was 40. Last year I had car trouble, I said. This year I left early and took my time. On purpose. She considered this and found it acceptable. We ate at the table Margot and I had set for 30 years of Christmases. The good plates, cloth napkins, a candle Nathan had found in an unpacked box and decided tonight deserved. The drawing was on the refrigerator where it had been since February. 2 figures on a dock. Grandpa and me. Someday. Halfway through dinner, Lily said without preamble that her parents were going to try counseling. How do you feel about that? I asked. Cautiously optimistic, she said. That's what my science teacher says when an experiment might work, but you need more data. After dinner, she fell asleep on the couch, paperback open on her chest. Nathan and I sat with the last of the wine. The lake held the Christmas lights from the far shore in long, trembling lines on the water. She texted this afternoon, Nathan said quietly. Said to tell you Merry Christmas. Tell her Merry Christmas, I said. He looked at the lake. Are you okay, Dad? I looked at the herbs on the windowsill, the full bookshelves, Lily asleep, Nathan beside me, the quiet water outside. Better than okay, I said. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The candle burned low. Outside, the snow kept falling, going nowhere in particular, arriving exactly where it needed to. I learned that love is not the same as availability. I spent 5 years making myself available, my money, my signature, my silence, and I called it love. It was not love. It was fear dressed up as generosity, and it helped no one. I learned it too late. Do not make my mistake. If someone in your life has stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as a resource, the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to stop participating in that arrangement. Not with anger, with clarity. I believe God does not ask us to be endless wells for people who have forgotten how to be grateful. He asks us to be faithful stewards of the life we were given, including the years we have left. This is one of those grandpa stories that does not end with a bow tied neatly on top. It ends with two people eating lasagna at a small table by a lake, learning slowly to see each other honestly. Every family story worth telling has a moment like that, quiet, imperfect, and true. This grandpa stories is mine. Every family story has one waiting. This grandpa stories and every family story begins the same way, with someone finally deciding enough. If something in this story stayed with you, leave a word in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are new here, consider staying. Thank you for being here until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and life lessons. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you. For everyone else, we will see you in the next one.